The cameras flashed like lightning as the packed courtroom fell into an eerie, breathless silence. One man's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "You think the truth can be buried? Think again." That single sentence sent shockwaves across the nation, igniting social media feeds and dominating every news cycle within minutes. It wasn't just a hearing, it was a political earthquake, a spectacle of betrayal, corruption, and raw power that felt more like a Hollywood script than real life. The scene was electric. Senators sat frozen, jaws clenched. The accused shifted nervously in his seat, his carefully constructed facade cracking under the weight of the accusation. Millions watched live from their phones, offices, and living rooms, their screens glowing with outrage and disbelief. Twitter erupted. Headlines screamed. TikTok clips looped the moment over and over. Did you see that? America had been thrust into the center of a political showdown that no one saw coming. But this wasn't just drama for entertainment's sake. This confrontation symbolized something far deeper, a struggle for the very soul of American politics. It was about truth versus deception, dignity versus arrogance, and whether power could be held accountable in front of the entire world. The tension wasn't confined to the marble halls of Washington, it rippled into every conversation across the country. Families debated it over dinner. College students dissected it in lecture halls. Truckers on cross-country routes blasted talk radio as the moment replayed again and again. The stakes had never been higher. A single sentence had cracked the veneer of invincibility surrounding a political titan, and now the world was watching to see if justice could prevail. Every gesture, every pause, every whispered aside in that room carried the weight of history. It was a clash of values, a collision of narratives, and a defining test of American democracy itself. And yet, as dramatic as this opening moment seemed, no one was ready for what was coming next. Because what unfolded in the hours that followed didn't just shake Washington, it shattered the illusion of untouchable power, leaving a trail of headlines and questions that would haunt a nation for years to come. But that moment, the one that changed everything, was still to come. The confrontation didn't erupt in a vacuum, it came at a time when America was already simmering with tension. The nation stood at a crossroads, divided not only by party lines but by the very definition of truth itself. News cycles moved at lightning speed, outrage was currency, and trust in government had sunk to historic lows. The political arena had become a battlefield where narratives carried more weight than facts, and this hearing, this clash of personalities, promised to expose just how fragile the system truly was. Outside the marble walls of the Capitol, protesters lined the streets, waving signs and chanting slogans that echoed for blocks. Some demanded justice, others defended their chosen champions, and still others just wanted to witness the drama unfold. The entire country felt like a theater audience holding its breath, waiting for the curtain to rise on a performance that could rewrite history. For decades, politics had been a game played behind closed doors, but now, under the glare of cameras and viral social media clips, nothing was hidden. This wasn't just governance, it was spectacle, and the stakes were far higher than anyone dared to admit. What made this moment so dangerous, and so captivating, was how deeply it spoke to the American identity. It wasn't simply about one scandal or one confrontation. It was about whether justice could prevail when power was at its most arrogant, whether democracy still had the strength to hold its leaders accountable. The courtroom, with its stern wooden benches and towering judge's seat, wasn't just a room, it was a symbol. Every gavel strike echoed like a reminder of the values on which the nation was built: liberty, accountability, and truth. Inside, the tension was suffocating. Staffers whispered nervously, reporters tapped frantic notes into glowing laptops, and viewers at home leaned closer to their screens. Even those who claimed not to care about politics couldn't look away. This was more than headlines. It was a cultural reckoning, a story that pierced through political apathy and stirred something primal in every American heart. And at the center of it all stood two figures who could not be more different. One was polished and powerful, surrounded by a fortress of influence, smugly confident that the system would protect him. The other carried themselves with quiet strength, their voice calm but cutting, embodying dignity and resolve. The clash was inevitable, and everyone could sense it coming. The stakes weren't just personal, they were generational. What happened in this room would ripple outward, shaping policies, movements, and even elections. This was a test of character, of courage, and of whether truth could survive the storm of partisanship and corruption. And as the cameras zoomed in and the room settled into silence, there was a feeling, a deep, unspoken understanding, that this wasn't just another political spectacle. Something was about to happen that would be replayed for decades to come. A line was about to be drawn in American history, separating everything that came before from everything that would follow. But as the tension rose, no one could predict just how explosive the next move would be. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. All it would take was one sentence, one revelation, to turn this simmering confrontation into a firestorm that would shake the nation to its core. And that sentence was about to be spoken. He was once hailed as a rising star, a man who could charm a crowd with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. His story was polished, crafted, and endlessly repeated, a self-made leader who climbed the ranks of power through grit and determination. But behind the glossy campaign ads and perfectly staged photo ops lay a different story, one written in whispered deals, backroom promises, and the ruthless elimination of anyone who dared to stand in his way. Every empire begins with a single step, and his first was as calculated as his last. Years ago, when his name was barely a footnote in Washington, he made his allegiance clear: power over principle. Those early years were filled with small betrayals, political favors traded like currency, compromises that left ideals bleeding on the floor. He quickly learned that charisma was his sharpest weapon, and he wielded it with surgical precision, charming his way through scandals, distracting the press with carefully timed smiles and well-rehearsed outrage. But arrogance has a way of leaving footprints. With every promotion, every committee appointment, every whisper of influence, he grew bolder. He began to see himself as untouchable. The rules, it seemed, didn't apply to him. His office became a fortress of carefully curated power, an army of aides and consultants shielding him from accountability. Critics were dismissed as partisan hacks, opponents silenced with strategic leaks, and every scandal was spun into a badge of honor. Yet, behind closed doors, his empire was cracking. Former allies began to drift away, uneasy with the deals he struck and the lines he crossed. Stories circulated of intimidation tactics, threats to careers, and the quiet destruction of anyone who questioned his methods. Aides who once worshipped him left in silence, their loyalty replaced by fear. Even his speeches, once full of soaring rhetoric, began to carry a bitter edge, a sharpness that betrayed the insecurity beneath his polished exterior. Cameras captured him smiling, but those who knew him best saw the cracks. His confidence wasn't unshakable, it was brittle. He ruled not with respect, but with fear. And while fear may hold power, it also breeds enemies. For every handshake he offered on camera, there was a whispered insult off-screen. For every political favor granted, there was a silent demand for loyalty. Then came the scandals. They started small, an awkward soundbite, a questionable expense report, a late-night tweet that sparked controversy. Each one was brushed aside, dismissed as overblown or irrelevant. But scandals have a way of stacking up, and soon they formed a tower too high to ignore. Rumors became headlines, and headlines became investigations. The man who once seemed untouchable now spent his nights making frantic calls to fix problems he had created himself. He still believed he could weather it all. He had faced storms before. He had always come out stronger. But this time, the whispers weren't going away. The stories were louder, sharper, and harder to control. The press began to dig deeper, uncovering connections he thought were buried. Allies stopped returning calls. Even those closest to him began to doubt. Still, he put on a show. In public, he was calm, collected, even defiant. His confidence radiated in every photo op, every hearing, every speech. But the cameras couldn't capture the flicker of panic in his eyes, or the way his hand tightened on the podium when he felt the walls closing in. He thought he was the storm. He thought no one could touch him. But what he didn't realize was that he had built his empire on sand, and the tide was coming in. This hearing, the one playing out live before millions, wasn't just another political skirmish. It was the reckoning he never saw coming. He had underestimated his opponent, dismissing them as just another critic to be crushed. But this wasn't politics as usual. This was something else. And as he sat there, smirking under the glare of television lights, he couldn't feel the ground shifting beneath him. The smirk wasn't confidence, it was denial. The empire he had spent decades building was about to collapse, not with an explosion, but with a single, carefully delivered sentence. Because empires built on fear and arrogance always fall the hardest. Long before their name echoed through the halls of Congress, they were just another face in a crowded working-class neighborhood where survival wasn't guaranteed but hope was non-negotiable. Theirs was not a story written in privilege, but in grit, a narrative carved out of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and a relentless belief that one person could make a difference. Their parents had arrived in America with little more than a suitcase and an unshakable dream. The father worked 2 jobs, often coming home long after midnight, his hands stained with grease from factory floors. The mother cleaned houses in neighborhoods they could never afford to live in, her tired smile masking exhaustion. They didn't have much, but they gave everything they could to their children: a warm meal, a safe home, and the belief that education could be a ladder out of struggle. As a child, the future hero often sat on the front steps of their tiny apartment building, watching neighbors navigate poverty, discrimination, and endless hustle. They didn't grow up shielded from life's harshness, they were immersed in it. They saw friends lose parents to illness because healthcare was out of reach. They watched peers drop out of school to work and support their families. These weren't statistics, they were stories, faces, and memories etched into their heart. By high school, they were already different. Not in wealth or appearance, but in drive. They excelled academically, staying up late to study after long shifts at a corner store. They volunteered at community centers, organized food drives, and became the voice for classmates who didn't think they had one. Teachers often recalled their quiet confidence, a calm determination that stood out even in chaos. College wasn't handed to them. It was fought for. Scholarships, loans, part-time jobs, every diploma and certificate was a hard-earned victory. And yet, even in academia, they felt like an outsider, carrying the weight of a family's sacrifice and a community's expectations. When most students went home for the summer, they stayed behind, working jobs and sending money home, never forgetting where they came from. Then came a defining chapter: military service. They enlisted not for glory, but for opportunity. Basic training was grueling, but they endured it with the same quiet resolve that had carried them through every obstacle. Overseas deployment taught them lessons no classroom ever could: what courage looked like under fire, how leadership required sacrifice, and how camaraderie could transcend race, politics, and background. They came home decorated, but never boastful, carrying memories of brothers and sisters in arms who never made it back. The experience hardened them, yes, but it also deepened their empathy. They had seen firsthand the cost of conflict, the fragility of life, and the importance of standing up for those who couldn't. These lessons would become their greatest weapon, shaping not just their character but their entire approach to politics. Back in their hometown, they didn't chase fame or power. Instead, they started at the grassroots level, organizing town halls, fighting for better schools, and championing affordable housing. They weren't polished or connected, they were authentic. People listened because they knew this was someone who had lived their struggles, someone who didn't just speak about injustice but had experienced it. When they finally ran for office, the campaign was scrappy, fueled by volunteers and grassroots donations. Opponents mocked their lack of experience and their unorthodox style, but voters saw something different: a fighter. They saw someone who carried their stories with dignity and wasn't afraid to challenge those who abused power. Against all odds, they won. In office, they refused to become just another politician. They rode public buses, visited struggling neighborhoods, and answered calls themselves. While others chased headlines, they chased solutions. Slowly, their reputation grew, not as a firebrand, but as a steady, unshakable force for justice. But power attracts enemies. As their influence expanded, so did the resistance against them. Corrupt officials saw them as a threat. Lobbyists found them impossible to sway. Their refusal to play political games painted a target on their back. And that target would lead to the very confrontation now unfolding in front of millions. Still, their demeanor never changed. They carried themselves with calmness, not arrogance; humility, not fear. Even now, as the villains smirked under the courtroom lights, the hero sat with quiet strength, radiating the same resolve that had defined their journey from the start. They had walked through fire before: poverty, war, systemic injustice, and come out stronger every time. What was another battle? They weren't here to trade insults or score political points. They were here to speak truth, no matter the cost. Theirs was a story written not by privilege, but by perseverance. And every chapter had prepared them for this exact moment. The sacrifices of their parents, the lessons from the military, the heartbreak of their community, all of it had forged someone who wouldn't back down when it mattered most. The villain thought they were facing just another politician. What they didn't realize was that they were facing a force built from decades of struggle, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to justice. And when the time came, That quiet strength would shatter their opponent's confidence like glass. The air in the chamber was thick with anticipation, every whisper swallowed by the weight of what was about to unfold. The villain leaned forward, fingers steepled, eyes glinting with a mix of arrogance and calculation. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every smirk, every dismissive glance. He was in his element, ready to put on a show, and the audience knew it. "Tell me," he sneered, voice dripping with condescension, "do you even understand the complexity of the decisions made at this level? Or are you just here for the cameras?" Laughter rippled from his allies seated nearby, the kind of laughter that wasn't genuine but weaponized, to humiliate, to dominate. The hero didn't flinch. They sat perfectly still, hands folded on the desk, eyes fixed on their opponent. The stillness itself was power. "Answer me," the villain barked, slamming his palm on the table. Gasps echoed through the room. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised, their cameras capturing the theatrics. The villain was playing to the crowd, turning the chamber into a stage. The hero finally moved, adjusting their microphone with deliberate calm. "I'll answer," they said softly, their voice steady. That steadiness only enraged their opponent further. The tension in the room thickened. Even viewers at home could feel it through their screens, the clash of two worlds, arrogance versus dignity, chaos versus composure. The villain threw out accusation after accusation, interrupting every attempt at response. He waved papers in the air, pointed fingers, and raised his voice until it reverberated off the chamber walls. But the hero remained unshaken. Each insult landed like a punch that didn't leave a mark. Their silence became its own weapon, unnerving even the villain's allies, who began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. In the gallery, the crowd's energy was shifting. At first, they had been entertained by the spectacle, some even amused by the villain's theatrics. But now, the room felt different. The mockery had lost its charm, and all eyes began drifting to the one person who wasn't playing the game, the hero, calm and unyielding. "Answer the question," the villain roared again, his voice cracking just slightly, betraying a crack in his confidence. Cameras caught it, the slight quiver, the sweat gathering at his temple. It was subtle, but it was there. The hero leaned forward, their voice low but commanding. "I will," they said, "when you're ready to listen." The room froze. It was a simple statement, but it carried more weight than any insult thrown that day. The audience shifted, murmurs filling the gallery, reporters scribbling furiously. For a moment, the villain faltered, his face hardening as he realized he had lost control of the room. He tried to recover, forcing a laugh. "Oh, how noble," he said mockingly, but it rang hollow. The tide had turned. Viewers could sense it, too. Social media was already buzzing, the clips circulating in real time, the calmest takedown in politics. The villain's interruptions grew frantic, less strategic. He slammed his fist again, voice rising, accusing his opponent of incompetence, of lies, of betrayal. But his words no longer landed the same way. They sounded desperate, panicked. And through it all, the hero's composure became almost magnetic. Reporters in the back whispered to each other. "Do you feel that?" The energies shifted. Even members of the villain's own party avoided eye contact, their expressions tightening as if they could see where this was headed. And the hero? They simply waited. They didn't need to shout or gesture wildly. Their silence, their poise, was louder than any accusation. The room had reached a boiling point. The energy was volatile, every second stretching out like a taut wire ready to snap. Even those watching at home found themselves leaning forward, hearts pounding, waiting for what they knew was coming. Because everyone could sense it now, the villain's reign of control over the room was over. And then came the moment that silenced the room. The silence in the chamber was suffocating. The villain's voice, once thunderous, now hung in the air like an echo of arrogance, bouncing off the marble walls and landing with less impact than before. The hero adjusted their microphone slowly, the movement deliberate, almost ceremonial. Cameras zoomed in, reporters leaned forward, you could hear the faint hum of broadcast equipment. And then, nothing. The hero didn't speak. They let the silence stretch, holding the room hostage. Seconds ticked by like thunderclaps. The villain shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his smug smirk faltering just slightly. The audience could feel the tension, even viewers at home were glued to their screens, instinctively leaning closer. This wasn't hesitation. This was strategy. Finally, the hero spoke, Calm, measured, every word cutting through the air like a scalpel. "You've said a lot today," they began, voice steady. "But there's something you haven't said. Something you've been hiding." The villain stiffened. A flicker of panic flashed across his face, quickly masked by a forced smile. "Hiding? Please. I've been transparent." "Have you?" the hero interrupted softly, but with authority that silenced the entire chamber. They reached for a folder, placed neatly in front of them. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, just a simple manila folder, but the weight it carried was palpable. The hero opened it slowly, pulling out a single document, holding it up for everyone to see. "This," they said, "is the record you claimed didn't exist." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Cameras flashed. The villain's composure cracked. His hands twitched against the table, his posture stiffened. He tried to laugh it off, but his voice faltered. That's not accurate. "It's out of context," he stammered, his confident baritone now a strained whisper. The hero didn't respond right away. Instead, they paused, letting the weight of the evidence settle over the room like a thick fog. Then, slowly, deliberately, they began to read aloud. Each word echoed like a gavel strike. Emails. Transactions. Signatures. Evidence meticulously pieced together, painting a picture the villain had spent years burying. The chamber erupted, not in noise, but in energy. People leaned forward, jaws dropped. Reporters typed furiously, their screens glowing with headlines being written in real time. Social media feeds exploded. This is the moment. TikTok loops, Twitter threads, and live streams lit up like fireworks. The villain tried to interject, but his voice cracked. "This is ridiculous. Ridiculous." The hero's voice rose, not in anger, but with controlled force. "What's ridiculous is your belief that you could lie to the American people and get away with it." A murmur swept through the crowd, building like a wave. The villain's carefully constructed facade was disintegrating under the weight of undeniable proof. Sweat glistened on his forehead, his smile gone, replaced by a tight, pale grimace. The hero leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "You've built your career on intimidation, on bending the truth until people stopped questioning it. But the truth doesn't bend, sir. It breaks people like you." That line was the dagger. The room collectively gasped, the villain recoiling as if struck. The hero didn't relent. They held up another document, this one even more damning. "Shall we read this part together?" The villain froze. He didn't respond. His silence was louder than any denial. The audience could feel it. This was the turning point. The man who had ruled through fear was now the one trapped, cornered by facts, by truth, by someone who refused to play his game. The hero's voice softened, but that only made it more powerful. "For years, you've told this country you were a man of integrity. But integrity doesn't hide. Integrity doesn't need to silence critics or erase records. Integrity speaks for itself. And right now, the silence says more than your words ever could." A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. The villain's allies looked uneasy, shifting in their seats, whispering among themselves. The cameras zoomed in on his face, capturing the exact moment his confidence cracked like glass. And then, the hero delivered the final blow. "This isn't about politics. This isn't about left or right. This is about power, accountability, and the truth you thought no one would ever find. But here it is. In black and white. And every person in this room, every American watching right now, knows exactly what this means." The villain's hands trembled slightly as he reached for a glass of water, his once practiced bravado completely gone. Then, it happened, a single, deafening moment of silence. The kind of silence that's louder than applause, heavier than booze. Everyone in the room, and millions watching at home, knew the truth had just landed like a thunderclap. The tension shattered when a single clap echoed from the gallery. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the room erupted into applause, reporters standing to capture the chaos, social media melting down with hashtags like #TheTruthTakedown and #MicDropMoment. The hero didn't bask in it. They simply closed the folder, pushed it forward on the table, and leaned back, calm and composed, as if they had merely stated a fact rather than delivered the most devastating political blow of the decade. Meanwhile, the villain sat frozen, lips pressed tightly together, face pale. Cameras captured every detail. The sweat, the hesitation, the flicker of fear in his eyes. The empire he had spent years building was crumbling in real time, not with a bang, but with irrefutable evidence and the quiet strength of someone who refused to be intimidated. In homes across America, people cheered, messaged friends, and replayed the clip. It was a moment that transcended politics, a cinematic takedown that would become a staple of political history. The hero didn't need theatrics. They didn't need to yell. Their power came from preparation, from truth, from a life forged in resilience. And in this single unforgettable moment, the world had witnessed that strength firsthand. But as the applause died down and order was restored, a chilling thought settled over the room. If this was the strike that brought him down, what would the aftermath look like? The clip hit the internet like a lightning strike. Within minutes, it was everywhere, splashed across headlines, dissected by analysts, and looped endlessly on social media. What began as a tense confrontation in a marble-walled chamber had transformed into a cultural phenomenon, a rallying cry that spread faster than anyone could have predicted. Twitter was first. The hashtag mic drop moment trended globally within an hour, followed by hashtag the truth takedown and hashtag justice prevails. Influencers clipped the hero's final words, adding captions like, "This is what courage looks like," and "The moment everything changed." Memes exploded, side-by-side images of the villain's smug grin before the evidence and his pale, trembling face after. TikTok users remixed the scene into cinematic edits with dramatic music, turning a congressional hearing into a viral blockbuster. Late-night hosts wasted no time. By that evening, every major show had aired the clip, some replaying it in slow motion, others adding dramatic sound effects for emphasis. "This is better than any TV drama," one host joked, holding up a printout of the incriminating document. "Except this isn't fiction. This is real." The audience erupted in laughter and applause, but beneath the humor was a palpable sense of something seismic, a political reckoning playing out in real time. News outlets scrambled to cover every angle. Analysts debated the implications, while pundits argued over whether this was the moment that would define the next election cycle. "We're witnessing history," one anchor declared solemnly during a primetime broadcast. "This isn't just a political scandal, it's a turning point." But the most powerful reaction wasn't from newsrooms or comedians, it was from ordinary people. Across America, citizens who had grown cynical about politics found themselves inspired. Videos circulated of families watching the confrontation together, their cheers filling living rooms as the hero delivered their calm but devastating takedown. Comment sections overflowed with gratitude, "This is why we fight. Finally, someone stood up for us. This gives me hope." Activists seized the moment, using the clip to rally supporters, launch petitions, and organize marches. "We're done being silent," one organizer declared in a viral live stream, their voice trembling with emotion. "This moment is proof that power doesn't have to mean corruption." Within 24 hours, new hashtags emerged, hashtag truth wins, hashtag stand with courage, transforming the confrontation into a movement. Politicians couldn't ignore it either. Members of both parties rushed to issue statements. Some defended the villain, claiming the documents were taken out of context. Others distanced themselves, suddenly silent or evasive when asked for comment. Meanwhile, allies of the hero doubled down, praising their courage and demanding accountability. The villain's long-standing network of influence began to fracture in public view. International media picked it up next. Clips aired on global networks, with subtitles translating the hero's words into dozens of languages. Foreign commentators pointed to the scene as a testament to the resilience of democracy in a world where authoritarianism often dominated headlines. "This," one European journalist tweeted, "is what real leadership looks like." By the end of the week, the moment had been viewed hundreds of millions of times across platforms. Think pieces flooded the internet, how a single sentence shook Washington, the quiet power of truth, why this mic drop resonates beyond politics. Each article emphasized the same point. This wasn't just entertainment, it was inspiration. The villain's once unshakable image crumbled in the court of public opinion. Poll numbers plummeted. Editorial cartoons depicted him as a crumbling statue, toppled by a single truth. Even his supporters, once fiercely loyal, began questioning his narrative. The empire built on intimidation was unraveling thread by thread, not through a single scandal, but through a moment of raw, undeniable humanity. Meanwhile, the hero's stature skyrocketed. Their face became a symbol, plastered on posters and profile pictures. Fans began calling them the Calm Storm, a nickname that spread like wildfire. Podcasts and talk shows booked them for interviews, eager to hear the story behind the composure that had captivated a nation. They declined most offers, preferring to let the facts speak for themselves, but their silence only fueled the mystique. On college campuses, student groups held watch parties, replaying the hearing and breaking down every line like a masterclass in courage. Community leaders used the clip as a teaching moment. "This is how you stand firm in the face of power," one pastor said during a Sunday sermon. But the most profound reaction wasn't measured in likes, shares, or retweets, it was measured in hope. People who had given up on politics felt something shift. For the first time in years, one viral comment read, "I feel like someone is fighting for us." What had started as a clash between two individuals had become a cultural reset, a reminder that integrity could still win, that truth could still cut through noise, and that calm courage could be more powerful than rage. And yet, as the dust settled, a new tension began to rise. The villain wasn't done. Powerful people rarely go quietly. The battle was far from over, and whispers of retaliation began to circulate in Washington's back rooms. Because this wasn't just a moment, it was a movement. And movements have a way of shaking empires to their core. The hero didn't see their victory as a triumph over a single man. They saw it as a victory for every person who'd ever been silenced, doubted, or ignored. Standing in the spotlight of cameras, they spoke not with gloating or vengeance, but with calm conviction, their voice steady and deliberate, carrying across the chamber and into living rooms around the world. "This was never about me," they said. "This was about us. About every American who believes in dignity, justice, and the power of truth." Their words weren't political soundbites, they were a reminder. A reminder of what democracy is meant to be, not a stage for the arrogant, but a platform for accountability. They reminded the nation that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the principles that hold this country together. This country was built on the courage of ordinary people, they continued, people who believed their voices mattered. And today, we've shown that courage again. This is proof that when you stand firm, when you refuse to be intimidated, the truth will always find its way to the surface. The chamber fell silent, not out of fear, but out of respect. Reporters stopped typing mid-sentence, captivated by the stillness. Even those who had dismissed the hearing as political theater couldn't deny the weight of this moment. It wasn't about left or right. It wasn't about one scandal or one figure. It was about the heartbeat of a nation, a reminder that democracy isn't a guarantee, it's a choice. And it's one that requires bravery from its citizens, not just its leaders. Clips of this speech quickly went viral, not because of flashy delivery or anger, but because of its simplicity. The hero's words struck something deep, resonating with people who'd long felt powerless. "This isn't just politics," one commentator said on a live stream that night. "This is a call to action." And it was. The message rippled outward, that courage isn't reserved for the few, and justice isn't a distant dream. It's built every day by people willing to speak, to fight, to believe in something bigger than themselves. The hero's composure had been their greatest weapon during the takedown, but their empathy was what turned that moment into a movement. They looked into the cameras, as if speaking directly to the millions watching. Your voice matters. Your story matters. No matter how small you feel, this country belongs to you as much as anyone else. And no amount of power or corruption can take that away if we refuse to let it. Those words reverberated far beyond the chamber walls. Parents replayed them for their children, hoping to teach courage. Activists shared them as a rallying cry. Even skeptics, hardened by years of broken promises, found themselves moved. Because at its core, this wasn't just about politics, it was about reclaiming belief in something pure, that integrity could stand against arrogance and win. The villain, once towering and untouchable, now sat in quiet disgrace. But there was no celebration in the hero's demeanor. They didn't need to humiliate him, the truth had already done that. Instead, they chose grace. "I don't celebrate your downfall," they said softly, "because this isn't about destroying one man. It's about saving the soul of a country." The moral clarity in that statement was undeniable. It was a reminder that the fight for justice wasn't about revenge, it was about building something stronger, fairer, and more compassionate. And so, this story that began as a tense clash of egos transformed into something greater, a lesson in resilience, a masterclass in courage, and proof that calm, steady integrity could move mountains. As the hero left the chamber that day, crowds erupted, not in chaos, but in applause. Strangers held signs that read, "Truth wins." The air felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from the shoulders of those who'd been watching, waiting, and hoping. The world had been reminded that power isn't defined by volume or arrogance, but by principle. And that reminder was powerful enough to inspire millions to believe again. This wasn't the end of a fight, it was the start of a movement. And for every person watching from home, the message was clear: your voice matters. Your courage matters. And your story has the power to change everything. And so, this chapter of Shock Files draws to a close, not with a whisper, but with a thunderclap that shook the very foundations of power. What began as a clash between arrogance and integrity became a defining moment, a story etched into the political history of our time. The truth prevailed, and for a brief, powerful moment, the world remembered that courage can silence even the loudest voices of corruption. But this isn't just a story to watch, it's a movement to join. If you believe in justice, if you believe in integrity over arrogance, then you belong here. Subscribe now to join a movement that demands truth, accountability, and the courage to fight for what's right. Every episode of Shock Files isn't just entertainment, it's a reminder of your power. We want to hear from you. These stories aren't just ours, they're yours too. Comment your story. Share your truth. Because when voices come together, they can rewrite history. Let this channel be more than a place to watch drama unfold. Let it be a community where dignity and democracy always rise above corruption. And don't look away now. If this story shocked you, if it left you breathless, you'll want to be here for what comes next. Because while today's takedown exposed one empire built on lies, tomorrow's episode will expose something even bigger, and you won't want to miss it. So hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and join the fight for truth. Because on Shock Files, every episode reminds us that the real power isn't in the hands of a few. It's in the stories we choose to tell, share, and believe in. And the next story is already on its way.